Hello, I'm Becky Simon with the League of Women Voters of Naperville. This event is being recorded. Welcome to our attendees and welcome to our panelists, Naperville City Councilwoman Theresa Sullivan. League of Women Voters of Naperville is a non-partisan organization. We do not support or oppose political parties or candidates for public office. We do work for a more perfect democracy. We are your friendly local civics geeks. Our parent organization, the League of Women Voters of the U.S., is committed to improving methods of financing political campaigns in order to ensure the public's right to know, combat corruption and undue influence, enable candidates to compete more equitably for public office, and promote citizen participation in the political process. Our state organization, League of Women Voters of Illinois, has been active in campaign finance reform since the mid-1990s. LWVIL joined the Task Force on Campaign Finance Reform in Illinois to research and promote public discussion of the role of money in politics, producing the report, Tainted Democracy: How Money Distorts the Election Process in Illinois and What Must Be Done to Reform the Campaign Finance System. LWVIL is currently a member of the Illinois Campaign for Political Reform. Tonight, we will hear from Naperville City Councilwoman Theresa Sullivan about her proposed new ethics rules for the Naperville City Council. Then League member Kelly Mahoney will host the Q&A follow-up. When asking a question, please use the Q&A feature and not the chat. We have disabled the chat to avoid any confusion for this session. So now, I would like to introduce Councilwoman Sullivan. Theresa is a Naperville native and a first-term member of our City Council. Theresa is a working mom, and like so many of us today, she is balancing her children's at-home e-learning and her career, all at the same time. Theresa?
Thank you, Becky. Can you hear and see me okay? I'm gonna go with yes on that unless I'm told differently. I'm gonna share my screen. Actually, Kelly, could you give me the privileges to share the screen, please? Welcome everybody who's in the call right now.
All set.
Great, thank you. Okay, thank you. Thanks to the League of Women's Voters for putting this together and asking me to speak today. Tonight, I'm excited to talk about the conflict of interest ordinance that City Council will be considering tomorrow night and that we'll be making a final vote on in our December 1st meeting. If passed, it'll be the first of its kind in Illinois, and Naperville Council members would hold ourselves to a higher standard of transparency than state or federal law mandates. In order to understand where this is coming from and why it's necessary, I'll begin by providing a little background on current ethics laws and norms, and then go into the thinking behind what this conflict of interest ordinance resolves, as well as some of the potential pitfalls that exist. And then I'd love to take your questions. So to put all of this into context, I think it helps to explain what some of the current rules are for both candidates and for council members. When you're a candidate for local office, if you raise or you spend more than $5,000 for your campaign, you must follow campaign disclosure rules and file with the State Board of Elections on a quarterly basis. All of those filings are public information and they're there to promote transparency. Candidates for local office can accept up to $5,800 in donations from individuals, $11,600 from unions and organizations, and up to $57,800 from PACs or other political committees. You must report cash as well as services and goods received as in-kind donations. Candidates must also report every expenditure they made for their campaigns. And further, If you get over $1,000 from a single donor in one donation, you must immediately report it to the State Board of Elections instead of waiting to file a quarterly report. So those are the relevant laws that candidates must comply with. If you're then elected to office, then you have a new set of rules to follow. For instance, the state expressly prohibits you from soliciting or accepting gifts from anyone who seeks some official action, who will do business with the city, or who is regulated or affected by municipal actions. These are, there are some exemptions. In Naperville, you can accept up to $75 in food or drink from a source in one day, but no more than anything worth more than $100 in a year from somebody doing city business. And this may surprise some people, but even if a council member's offered a free ticket to a fundraising event as a guest, but those tickets cost $200 to everyone else, the member cannot accept it unless they pay for what the ticket's worth or make a donation for the same amount of that ticket. The laws are extremely restrictive about any sort of gifts council members can accept, which is right and good. It's a good thing that we've got that. Likewise, council members are also prohibited from voting on any contracts that come before the city that they have a personal interest in. Obviously, if they or a spouse, say, owns a snow plowing business and that business is competing for a city contract, they can't vote nor play any role in that. And there are also conflict of interest laws that cover things outside contracts. Basically, the rule is that there can be a conflict of interest if a council person's loyalties are divided to the extent that he or she is not capable of considering an issue objectively. So conflict of interest can apply to any decision a council member is considering, and there are different levers which could cause a person's loyalties to be divided. Where it gets dicey is that whether or not a member has a conflict of interest is subjective and totally up to the council member to decide for themselves. There have been plenty of cases where council members have recused themselves from votes, either because they feel there is a potential conflict of interest, or even if it looks like there could be. So for instance, Councilwoman Broadhead works for North Central College, and generally she recuses herself when matters pertaining to the college come before council. Mayor Cherico recused himself once when the petitioners on a city matter were tenants in one of his rental properties. In both of these instances, the decision to recuse was up to that council member alone. They cannot be made to recuse against their will, so each council member has a lot of leeway to decide for themselves if they have a conflict of interest. For obvious reasons, that can be problematic, especially when the onus is on that person to police themselves. So campaign finance laws govern what candidates and their contributors can do, and state ethics rules govern gift bans and avoiding conflicts of interest for elected officials. So what's the problem? The problem is that there is nothing that ties donations to a candidate, that ties the donations that a candidate accepts to the votes they make as a council member. A council member can't enrich themselves in office or accept gifts of any relevant value for themselves, but nothing stands between the council member voting on contracts, ordinances, or variances that can enrich their campaign donors who help them get elected. So consider this example. If a local law firm who does business with the city were to offer me a check for $1,000 today, I couldn't accept that under the gift ban. It'd be seen as a bribe and it would be a crime. But if that same law firm donates $1,000 to my campaign committee today, then it's totally legal. And apart from alerting the Board of Elections that they made that donation, I have no obligation to let city officials or other council members or the public know about it, and I would not need to recuse myself on any item that that law firm might come to council with. So campaign donations offer a huge legal lever for parties to influence the decisions of elected officials. Before I ran for council, I wasn't aware of any of this. I've learned it as I've gone. And now that I've seen what can be done, I feel that the public has a right to know how things work. And that's why I asked for council to consider this new ordinance that would be the first of its kind to bridge that transparency gap between a council member's campaign donors and their votes. In a nutshell, the ordinance, there are two options on the table, and the ordinance would require a city council member who's accepted a relevant campaign contribution over $500 from an interested entity who has an interest in a particular vote to either recuse themselves from the vote, that's option one, or alternatively, they could disclose verbally prior to the vote that the contribution was made and from whom. That's option two. As you might guess, this is very controversial to council members and people who give a lot of money to campaigns. It is asking city council members to go above and beyond what's required to be transparent to the public. People tend to be nervous about how awkward it might be to disclose contributions that could be construed as a conflict of interest right before a vote. And politicians and their donors have enjoyed these relationships that are seldom made public. I'm not the first person to notice these issues, but Naperville could be the first municipality in Illinois to do something about it, making this very exciting for our city and for our constituents. There are a lot of questions, and this is a really tricky thing to do because we want this to promote ethical behavior and transparency, but we don't want it to disrupt how the council gets business done or to promote possibly worse behavior to circumvent this ordinance. So I'll go over some of the most frequently asked questions, and then I'll take yours if I don't talk about something that you're interested in. So first, why the $500? There's no doubt it's tricky to set the right limit for when a donation might become a conflict of interest. I think $500 is a good compromise because our law already establishes that any gift over 100 is prohibited while a person's in office. And election law holds that any individual donation to a campaign that's over 1,000 triggers an immediate need to file with the Board of Elections. So I think the right number is somewhere above 100 and under 1,000. It's kind of a compromise between those two, and 500's a very easy number to remember and to comply with. Now, there are people who will say that $500 is too low a threshold, and that when you consider but when you consider the average winning candidate spent a total of $12,000 on their entire city council campaign, $500 isn't insignificant. And the truth is, in the normal course of fundraising for a local election, there are only a handful of donations that come in above the $500 threshold for the average candidate. Think about how much money, if any, that you've donated to an individual in a local campaign. If you wrote a check for over $500 to a single candidate, it would put you in a minority. So who's writing the bigger checks? Often organizations or individuals who have an interest in city business or influence do. And as we've been over, large donations are acceptable and perfectly legal way to help candidates who they think can be favorable to them. I don't think that this has happened in Naperville before, but hypothetically, a PAC could legally give a candidate $50,000 to run, and that candidate could outspend everyone else by 4 times, and that would likely be a huge factor in how well the candidate does in the race. So people should be worried about who that PAC is and what interests they have in city business, because chances are that that city council member knows very well. And I don't mean to say that there are any explicit promises made in exchange for campaign contributions, but when a candidate gets a large donation from a donor, that generosity is not likely to be forgotten, either by the candidate or the donor. At the municipal scale, donations over $500 are few and far between and are not insignificant to a candidate's ability to win an election. Some people, in talking about this ordinance, have misconstrued or distorted what this means to a candidate's ability to raise money. It does not change anything about what a candidate can legally accept from a donor. This ordinance does not change state campaign finance laws in any way. It only holds elected officials accountable for being transparent about their acceptance of large campaign donations, especially when those donors are publicly asking council members to take action on a matter. Last month, we had a vote on a franchise agreement between the city and Comcast. Both the mayor and another council member had recently received large campaign donations from Comcast. And in this case, both of them decided to recuse themselves from that vote, which was the right thing to do. And it's exactly what this ordinance would ensure. But they weren't obligated to do this. Only this ordinance would have required them to do so instead of leaving it up to them alone. There have been far more instances where a member has neither recused nor disclosed before a vote that an interested party in the vote was also a large donor to their campaign, because nothing compels them to do so. And it's completely legal for them not to do that. So what happens if a council member doesn't recuse or disclose under this ordinance if it gets passed? Truthfully, not much. The member can be subject to censure by the rest of the council. There are no criminal or legal repercussions built into this ordinance. If there were, this would have no chance of passing, if we're being honest. Running and serving on city council is an honor and it's a sacrifice. The threat of legal action is always present if rules are broken, and nobody wants to risk that kind of exposure. All of us have lives and livelihoods that we have to attend to, and most of us don't want to add any more risk than we already take on for serving in public office. So that explains what happens if somebody were to break this ordinance. Some people have also asked how we'll hold council members accountable for proper reporting when a conflict of interest exists in this ordinance. The candidate's D2 statements filed with the state election board will be the record used to determine which contributions must be disclosed. This way it's transparent and unambiguous to the donor, to the public, and to the council member what a relevant campaign contribution is. The other part of this ordinance defines who an interested entity is. And I'll quote from the ordinance. This is long, so bear with me here. An interested entity is defined as any individual person, organization, union, partnership, proprietorship, firm, or corporation who is a petitioner, public objector, or agent, or representative of a petitioner or public objector concerning a matter pending before City Council. So basically, anybody who's publicly arguing for or against the matter in a City Council meeting or their representative is an interested entity under this ordinance. An easy example is if a council member received $1,000 from a developer who's asking City Council to approve for approval on a project. That developer is an interested party, and the council member should recuse or disclose depending on which option we pass. If an individual person is speaking out against this development at City Council and has given a council member more than $500, then that council member would also need to recuse or disclose from the donation that that individual person gave them. Which brings us to some of the issues. The two options on the agenda, option 1 requires recusal and disclosure if there's a conflict of interest, while option 2 requires only public disclosure prior to the vote. Option 1, recusal, can be problematic, and there are some instances where it could cause some chaos. So for example, my campaign was endorsed by the firefighters union when I was running for City Council. As part of that endorsement, they donated $1,000 to my campaign. Since I began serving on council, we had to vote on the firefighters union's contract. I felt really conflicted about whether it was right to vote on that item because of the contribution that I received. The problem was that the majority of people on council had also accepted similar donations from that union. So if every member recused for that reason, we couldn't have actually held a vote. There wouldn't have been a quorum, and then we'd have a problem. So I wound up publicly disclosing that I had received the $1,000 from the union before I took that vote, just for my own conscience. But even if recusal wasn't practical, I thought transparency was important. And that's kind of the difference between option 1 and 2. Another potential example of a problem with recusal, option 1, is that donors could potentially use this as a bargaining chip to force council members to recuse from a vote. So say a donor gives $501 to multiple candidates that go on to win an election. If one donor comes to council as a petitioner or as an objector on any item they feel like, then potentially multiple council members would have to recuse on that same vote. It's written in the ordinance that if council can't get a quorum because of that, recusals would be waived and the members could vote they could vote, but they would have to disclose. Of course, that opens up the possibility that donors would have more incentive to give over $500 to more people so that they cause the issue of not having a quorum and that everyone can vote. So for this reason, I actually think option 2 is the better one for us to start with because of the unintended consequences that may come from recusal in option 1. This ordinance is meant to make candidates think about who they are getting campaign contributions from and how that may or may not pose a conflict of interest on future issues. It should also make potential donors think more about how their contribution might affect a candidate's ability to vote or disclose that to the public. Rather than letting a council member be the sole judge of whether they have a conflict of interest when it comes to campaign donations, I think we should just offer the facts to the public and let them be the judge of that. So thanks for listening to all that. It was a lot of information. I hope that if you have thoughts about the ordinance, you'll let the mayor and council members know through emailing us at council@naperville.il.us. Or you can speak on the issues tomorrow at our meeting, which is when we'll have the first reading of the ordinance. I hope this summary was helpful, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you have.
Great. Thank you. We do have quite a few questions. So
Okay.
Awesome. And thank you for not sharing your screen because now we can see each other. All right. So the first question that we'll start with, and feel free to keep the questions coming in as we work through them because we will start to just go with live questions in a few moments. Could you maybe talk a little bit about what inspired you to come up with this proposal?
Yeah, what inspired me was actually the same reason I was inspired to run for city council in the first place. I didn't have, and I still don't have aspirations to be a political figure or go seek other office. But what I did see was, I was very interested in what was going on, and I did see that there was a lack of trust among a lot of people around why, whether some votes on city council were done in the best interests of the public and not because there might have been something going on that helped somebody else. So for me, that was that I want government to be a place where we can trust what people are doing and saying, and that it's really for the benefit of the public. So I thought, well, I know that's how I have no conflict of interest. I don't have any business in Naperville. I don't have any friends that need to be, that I owe anything to. So I'll just run and see, and kind of be the change you wish to see in the world, if you will. So this was important to me from the beginning, that we could maybe move government, even if it's just at this local level, even if it's just in Naperville, to a point where we can be better than we have to be.
That's great. Now, you had mentioned that there wouldn't be another municipality that has passed an ordinance like this. Are there other municipalities that have similar rules, or where did you draw this inspiration from?
Well, there are municipalities that have rules about where they limit the amount of contributions that someone can get in an election. So I believe Arlington Heights has on the books that you can't take more than $500 from an individual or $1,000 from an organization when you run. But that got into campaign finance laws, and that is subject to, could be subject to lawsuits and other things. So the reason that this one got changed is so that we wouldn't have to touch the campaign finance laws, because it's just such a big bowl of spaghetti. And this was a way that we could bridge this gap between the donations and the gift ban policy when you're on council. So So we just made it up. And as I talked about, you know, when I first visualized this, it was definitely recusal. I thought if you have to recuse, then people will stop taking so much money. However, in talking to my peers and other people, they were bringing up all the ways that a recusal might go down a path that wasn't intended. So I think that's why now I'm thinking probably option 2 is a better option because it has less, it's less likely that it will be abused.
And speaking of peers, and you'd mentioned having it reviewed, can you share, and we've gotten a couple questions on this, can you share a little bit about how the other city council members, staff members, have they had a chance to provide you input? Is there a general sentiment that you can share?
Well, I don't want to speak for any of the other council members, but I will say that, and I kind of alluded to this as I was going through it, there is a lot of reticence. This is not a super popular ordinance. And I think a lot of it does come from a good place where you stay in politics or you serve in office long enough and there's so many shenanigans that are happening all the time. I think there's some fear that this won't be used for the purpose that it's intended for, and it will be used against them. So I think that there's a fear there. And I also think that that some people believe that they're incorruptible. And since they are someone who would never think that, you could give them $10,000 and they would never vote, one way or the other because of it. And that's up to, they can decide that. But I think what I'm trying to say is this would be for all council members, present and future. So even though you may be incorruptible, do you really think that no one else could be, right? So that's kind of where I think there's some reticence. There are a few that are really for this, and I do think that I will also say this. I don't think option 1 has legs. I don't think it will get the votes. It won't get the votes. So option 2, the disclosure alone, I do think that has a good chance.
There was a couple questions on why 2 options. So why not go with the 1 option? I think it's sort of self-explanatory, the recusal. Yeah, I think we've addressed that. So that helps. Now, why though, how many votes do we need? Can you share that, the process of votes in order to pass?
Sure, just a simple majority. So we just need 5.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Great. And then you had addressed why there may be some reticence for sure, but are there any, outside of just trusting the process, are there any weak points to this? It's brand new legislation, it's a brand new ordinance. Can you think of any sort of weakness to this particular ordinance?
Sure, I think there's a few. It's certainly not perfect. First of all, again, the glaring weakness in the recusal in option 1 we've already discussed. So that was the first thing that came up, is like, a lot of potential pitfalls. On the other hand, the fact that the worst thing that can happen to you if you don't follow the ordinance, if you're on council, is that you would get censured. And that doesn't really mean anything except like public shaming. It doesn't, you wouldn't be kicked out of office. You wouldn't have to pay a fine. There are no legal repercussions. So, if someone really wanted to just flaunt it or just decide that this rule wasn't for them and they didn't care, that could be a potential pitfall of this. So, but I do think it gives, because the D2 is public, it does give the public a chance to write that if a candidate's not a candidate, if a council member's not going to do it, but it also gives other council members a chance to say, hey, if so-and-so isn't going to disclose that they did, then I will disclose it for them, but so it's that kind of can be how that can be remedied if a council member decides that they're not going to follow the ordinance.
Are all donations public knowledge?
Yeah, so All donations, so it gets, without getting to a lot of detail, over $5,000, then yes, they have to, donations have to be um, reported to the state. There may be some minimum threshold, like maybe under $100 or something like that. That could exist. But again, if a person's trying to get around this ordinance by messing with their D2s and their campaign disclosure, then they're really messing with fire, because that is criminal. I mean, those, then you get in trouble. So I trust that process is enough to make, and that's why we use the D2s in this one as the record of truth, if you will, about what someone's taken. I certainly wouldn't want council members to be open to somebody potentially saying, hey, you took X amount of money from this person for this reason, when there's no way to prove. It's like a he said, she said type thing. So anyway, the D2 should take care of that. Well,
there was a couple questions just about accountability, and if the donations are public knowledge, how are you holding people accountable? And then I'm thinking about another question, which is, what is a negative ramification? And I feel like you're kind of circling around that, which is, will we get into a situation where council members and staff are now holding each other just accountable, and there's all this, like, I don't know, just swirl, right, about whether or not you should recuse or whether or not you should step back? And can you comment on that? Because I think the question is, what's the downside, right?
Yeah, and again, I think especially when it comes to disclosure, there's not. I mean, a council member doesn't have to disclose anything they haven't already disclosed to the state election board, so, or the board of elections. So it's not like a super secret thing that, and only the council member knows. It's public record. So it would be hard to do gotchas. And that's what I meant by, one person saying you did this or you did that. Well, that if it's not on your D2, then it didn't happen. And I should also say there people have said, well, what if and this was especially when recusal was on the table. What if I didn't like a council member or how they were going to vote on something, so I gave them a donation just to knock them out and again, everyone can choose who they take donations from and in what amount. People are not forced. Candidates are not forced to take money from anybody. But also in your filings, that's for your election. If somebody else is doing something that has nothing to do with your election committee, then that's not going to be counted under this ordinance.
And could ordinary citizens then raise concerns about what they perceive as are a potential violation?
Sure, they could raise concerns, and they always can go. If you go to Sunshine, Illinois, that's a website that will help any member of the public see who gets what donations from any of their elected officials. So if it's filed with the state, it's on Sunshine, Illinois. You can also go to the state Board of Elections to find that out. So you could, and that's where that's how I got the numbers I did about what people spent to run for office in this last round for city council. So all that information is out there. It's just that it's so esoteric and most people don't have time to go look. The council members should know, and I think should be able to tell people that fact, right at the time of the vote.
And does this apply to in-kind donations as well?
It does. The D2 is it's cash and it's in-kind donations. So all of those things count.
And then would this rule, if passed, apply to Planning Zoning Commission, the Historic Preservation Commission, and other parts of the government?
No, this ordinance wouldn't touch those for a few reasons. The first is that on our commissions, those people aren't elected. So they are appointed. And so they won't have campaign donations. This whole thing is about connecting the dots between campaign donations and votes. So it doesn't make sense for this particular ordinance to apply to commissioners. but certainly, you know, it would be great to know also for commissioners if they have a conflict of interest when they're making recommendations to the city council. And I know that exists now, but I don't know what is in place to ensure that it's being followed.
That's great. Okay, we're going to take some questions just live, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So these are just coming in, and I'm going to verbatim read them if you're okay with that.
Sure.
Have you received much support from the public yet?
Yeah, absolutely. People are really excited about this. And I guess it doesn't surprise me because, again, I cared about it before I was even on council. And it was really important to me just to be able to trust that everybody on council is doing everything transparently and is really doing the best they can and making the best decision they know how to make for our community. And so I've heard from a lot of people that they're, you know, excited about it. But to be honest, you know, local ordinances between COVID and between the election, this November elections, you know, people are full of stuff right now. And so this little thing isn't, I don't think, top of anybody's, you know, on the top of anybody's radar right now.
I think it's complicated in a lot of ways too. So this is wonderful because it's helping to simplify. Okay, so we did touch on this a little bit, but I think it's a slight variation on this theme. So I hope you don't mind, we're gonna ask this. What would you say to other council members if their argument against this is that it would not impact city ethics, only drive donations more underground through a PAC or other means to dodge disclosure?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, that's interesting because it gets to the heart of like, look how dirty this can get. Like if the first thing people think of is, well, you know, if you try and make things more transparent, then people are gonna try and make things less transparent. So then argue to me that there isn't a conflict of interest. If, you know, the same people will tell you, you know, again, there's nothing here to see. There's no big deal. There's no problem we're having. And then that it's really that kind of same logic, which is messed up, that is also like, well, fine, then, you know, if we were to do this, then people will be bad actors. And you know, and I guess my second answer to that is go ahead and break, if you're the type of person who's going to run for office and you want to break campaign finance laws to get around this little ordinance if you get elected to just be transparent about it, then that shows who you are. I mean, that really shows that underbelly of what can happen in politics. So I guess that's my answer to that is like, you know, you can't stop all the bad actors. I mean, this is, you know, and this isn't meant for that. It's only meant for transparency.
How granular does interested party, that's in quotes, get? Say there's an issue before council and Jane Doe stands up at a council meeting and speaks against the issue as a citizen, not a party with a financial interest. If Jane donated $501 to a council member, would this apply?
It would. I didn't, when I originally thought of this, I didn't like that because it seemed like this is more for the petitioner. But one of the council members, when I first brought this up in new business, had said, well, what about objectors? Sometimes somebody petitions council for something and their objectors have something to gain by voting against it. And they've made a good point. And so yes, in this case, Jane Doe's 501 donation would be, again, let's just go with option 2. Then a person would have to disclose, hey, by the way, I got, took that over $500 from this person who just got up and said what they thought about this.
Great. If the donations of this level are required and a matter of public knowledge on D2s, is this ordinance duplicative? It seems like extra work, but an incremental added level of transparency.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. It's again, it's no new news, you know, it's already public. But what it does is just make sure that it is top of mind and it connects those two things at the time of the vote. Because I don't think people should have to be sleuthing through Sunshine, Illinois to find out on every vote. So I think the onus should be, and is not too hard for a council member to go, did I take that? And again, the average council person, I can only think of, most of us are average. I mean, that's what average is, right? Has fewer than 10 donations that are over $500 for their whole campaign. So it is not that hard to remember who those people are.
Follow up from the question before on the Jane Doe.
Sure.
What if they had only donated $499?
Then no.
Right. Great. Going back. Are there concerns that donors could try to get around these rules by having family members donating through LLCs, etc.?
Yes. Again, that goes back to, your ethics as a person. And if you are specifically trying to raise money from people that you're so ashamed of that you don't want to say it on the dais before a vote, then, again, it's exactly the type of thing that is too bad. But yeah, I mean, there are ways to skirt every rule. So yes, that could be a possibility. In the spirit of this, it would be a really, less than cool thing to do.
And if commissioners don't have campaigns, then wouldn't any gift be extremely suspicious or worthy of regulating?
So if we're back to commissioners on boards, again, I'm not as familiar with the things that they have to sign as commissioners or their conflict of interest. It's definitely something to like look into. I'd be happy to do that. But I can't really answer that question because I guess it's even an assumption that there are conflict of interest rules that they have to sign to follow, but I don't know what they are and I don't know how well enforced they are. But certainly if it's about my idea about it, for sure, I don't think anybody should be allowed to, if city council people can't take gifts, which is good, don't get me wrong, I mean, then nor should commissioners. But I'm sure another argument would be that commissioners vote, but their votes are non-binding. I think on almost all commissioners, on all commissions, not on everyone, but on almost all of them, it comes to council for final approval.
So in terms of what happens next, you mentioned that the ordinance goes in front for first read tomorrow. Can you just share the process by which there is ultimately a final vote?
Sure, absolutely. So this is going to take the normal route that new ordinances always take. And we always have what's called the first reading, and it gives it pretty much is the way that the public is told about, here's an ordinance that we're thinking about. On the dais, different council members can talk about how they're going to vote or what they're thinking about it. We can change some things as a group. So for instance, I will probably be asking tomorrow, not probably, I will ask tomorrow, let's just think about option 2. Let's throw option 1 off the table. So let's just think about option 2 so that then the next time we meet, which is December 1st, that's when a final vote will come. So staff will bring back that option 2 instead of having these both options. So we would be more clear on what we would be voting on. And then on December 1st, when we take that final vote, there will also be a time for us, an agenda item for the public to speak on it, for us to speak about it, and then we'll take that final vote.
And where could the general population find the text for this proposed rule?
Okay, so if you go to the Naperville website, you'll see there's somewhere on the pages the government meetings, and you will see city council meetings. And for every single meeting that we have in the city, the agenda is published. And so you can click into that, it's a PDF, and you can see the wording of the ordinance. And you can do that with, again, for every single thing we ever talk about at a public meeting is on that agenda and is open to the public to take a look at. But that's where I would go, the City of Naperville website.
And then in terms of just responding to or letting city council members know how the public feels about this proposal, what is your advice?
Oh, my advice would be to email, or you could call your city council people, since no one's actually in their offices, or, we're all out. Email might be better. Council, spelled with CIL instead of not the legal counsel, but the council at naperville.il.us sends every member of council and the mayor the same email. So we will all get it at that one email address.
We have a couple more live questions that I did want to address. I'm going back to Jane Doe.
Sure.
All right, so for the Jane Doe example, it's easily identifiable if she stands up and speaks at a meeting.
Mm-hmm.
What if Jane emails the council member? What if she casually mentions displeasure in passing? What does this ordinance mean for Jane's ability to voice her opinions as a citizen on any issue?
Okay, so Jane can, first we'll say Jane can always express herself on any issue at any time, no matter who she gave what amount of money to on council. So let's get that straight first. This does not make anybody not be able to speak on something they care about. For this ordinance, the person, to be an interested entity, the person must be speaking at council during that specific thing. So if it's not something where I just know that Jane Doe doesn't like development, so even though she's not here at our city council meeting, or she hasn't put in a public comment on this, that then I have to tell everybody that she gave me $501. So so that's kind of how that goes. You have to be speaking on that issue at that meeting in order to register as an interested entity. But if you email, that's fine. If you're at a meeting and you say what you think, that's fine too. The council member would not have to disclose because that person isn't sitting there at city council asking for us to do something publicly.
And if you're unsuccessful in getting this ordinance passed, do you plan to reintroduce it after the April 2021 election?
I haven't even thought that far. I think it'll say something about the current council members. This is such a simple ask. It is such a simple ask, and it isn't going to apply every meeting. Again, like I said, the amount of instances where this would even come to pass are so few that, this is just such an easy thing. So if it doesn't pass, then, then I guess the public will have, the public will have to decide whether they want it. I know that it's an uphill battle, but I don't think it should be. And I really fail to see where a regular member of the public would see this as not something to vote for. And I almost feel the same way about council members. This is a simple thing. So I guess that's where I'll leave it. I'm not going to just keep pushing something that's not going to get votes. I know people do this where they come up with an ordinance, or they come up with something they know has no chance of passing, but they just want to get people talking, and they want to get the attention. As we can see even by the options, my motivation is to actually get something done. And so I want to make this an easy thing for my fellow colleagues to vote for. And I want it to be fair for them, and I want it to be fair for the public. So, if I got it wrong, and if somehow I just totally read the room wrong, and the public doesn't want it, nor do council members, then that's on me, then maybe it's not a great idea. So
Can you say more about the public will have to vote comment that you just made? If it doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, like in the election. Yeah, I mean, like if you know, there's the municipals are coming up in April, so you know, 3 of our incumbents will be up for re-election, and so, and that it might be something that the candidates talk about if they're knocking on doors or they're in forums. You know, that might be something that they're interested. Like they might come back and say, "Well, I would have voted for it." And then maybe it comes back because we've got a council who wants to behave that way and behave transparently and isn't afraid of that.
So how can Naperville residents speak up and either, you know, provide support for the cause, and what would be your advice for the next steps?
Well, I would love for the easiest thing to do would be to just write an email to council, letting us know why this ordinance is important, why it would be helpful to the public, and I think, you know, again, my hope is that it would be like, we can trust you more. If you're going to police yourself like this, if you're going to hold yourself to this standard, that means we can breathe a sigh of relief that, you know, we don't have to worry about looking at what you're, you know, going on our own and looking to see if there's some conflict of interest. The other thing that people can do is come to, well, you can't really physically come right now because we're doing everything on Zoom, but you can email public comments to be read into the record. And again, you can go on Naperville's website and sign up to do that. You can also speak on the phone at the meeting. So when that comes up, you know, the feedback would be great, because I do think we have to give members of council a reason to say yes to this, because it would be much easier for them to say no. So
that's great. There's 2 final questions that I would love to just get, and if we have a few minutes, so if you do have any other questions, let's go ahead and put them in the Q&A feature right now. And we're getting a few more. Okay. So if a member has future business dealings for themselves or a family, should they need to disclose that? Is there any provision for this possibility?
not in this ordinance. There is not, but I think yes. I mean, I would like to see, you know, it's like kind of like baby steps. I would love to see that. The problem is that no one can tell the future, you know, so it's very hard to say in the future, this is going to happen. So right presently, I'm going to do this. I mean, we think we know what's going to come, but if COVID has taught any of us anything, it's that we have no idea what's going to come next. So, so that makes that tricky. It makes it very tricky to kind of think in the future, I'll get something out of this, so I can't do it now. So that would be my answer to that. It's just very hard because I've thought about it for sure, but I haven't been able to figure it out. So if anyone has an idea about how we could do that in a way that makes sense, that'd be great. But it is pretty hard to be the future police, the future thought police, right? And then come back to the present time and make the right decision.
That's great. Can you comment on whether or not the mayor supports the ordinance?
The mayor has been in all I can tell you is what I've heard him say publicly in our meetings when we have talked about this. He's been dead set against it. So I unless, you know, but when we were talking about it, it was about recusal, but he's gone public and been publicly against it. I don't know if he's changed his mind. I guess I'll find out tomorrow. But I don't suspect that it will get his vote, but I certainly hope it does.
And then can you just clarify the correct name of the ordinance? It is conflict of interest ordinance. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what we're calling. Okay. Let me make sure that, I think that's what, let's see, it's called, and It's actually going to be, again, in legal terms, it's amending Chapter 13 of Title I of the Municipal Code, but I guess the layman's name is the Conflict of Interest Ordinance.
Great. Okay. Well, that is all we have in terms of questions from the question and answer. I just wanted to say thank you so much, Councilwoman Theresa Sullivan, for spending some time with us here tonight. We just got one more question, and since we do have 5 minutes, I'll go ahead and let it through. Has the city attorney signed off on the ordinance?
Yeah, the city attorney wrote the ordinance. So the city attorney wrote both options. So they are good to go from that perspective.
Great. Well, as you can see, a lot of lots of questions, very engaged.
Yeah, this is great.
Yeah.
Can I just say, like, it looks like there's 39 people on or in the attendees list, and that gives me so much hope for that people are still, with everything else everybody's dealing with, that we're still so much interest in what we're doing locally, and that's why I think this stuff matters, and I hope we can make Naperville proud by doing this.
Absolutely, and you had more like 56 at one point. So
oh wow, okay, wow, that's right.
Yeah, so very well attended event. So yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much. That will conclude this evening's meeting, and really appreciate your time, and thank you to all that participated, and have a great rest of your evening. Thank you
so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.